Yet another Mississippian has done us proud. A brand of native who has emerged on the national stage, now serving as the acting chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities. We welcome to the show today, Jon Peede. Jon, it's good to see you and welcome home.
Oh, well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, of course, you grew up in Rankin County in Brandon.
I did.
Graduated from high school, I guess, I'm not going to age you here, but in the late 80s.
Right, about 30 years ago.
Yeah. So it's been a fun ride, hasn't it?
It has. It really has.
So let me talk a little bit about that, because, I mean, you grew up in Mississippi, and I am a firm believer that this state shapes who we are. You were a big fan of Southern literature and the arts, even at a young age, weren't you?
Absolutely. And I think that was the great part about growing up in Mississippi. It was a small school, but we had weekly music lessons.
Yeah.
And you know, I would do everything everybody else did. I played, high school football and what have you. But, I'd write poetry at home and I would draw. And I didn't think you had to choose one or the other. And, go to the public library and pick out books. And, of course, because we're in Mississippi, it's not just the books on the shelf, but those writers are actually in the state walking around. And so it's an incredible state to be from. And it's served me throughout my career.
I've noticed on the front of your Twitter, the banner, the picture on your Twitter page, you've got like several Adora Welty books on there.
Yes. Well, my wife would say that we don't necessarily need 6 copies of the same book, but I felt each time it was the right day to buy that book, and so that's my favorite bookshelf, and it is Welty and Barry Hannah and Shelby Foote, etc.
I mean, you're right, because I mean, you think about when you were growing up, and right as you got into college, and about that time, you could go to the Jitney and see Adora shopping.
Absolutely.
I mean, Willie might be at the local bar in Oxford when you were up there. I mean, it's just, people don't understand it when you try to explain Mississippi and the arts.
Absolutely. The arts are so intimate in Mississippi.
Right.
It is the idea that we can say people by their first name, Willie, and we know we mean Willie Morris.
Right.
And people across generations know we do that. And then the lovely idea that it's always Miss Welty. And so that is the part. And when I think about what I'm trying to do at the federal level, is to carry that with me, this idea that the arts and the humanities, that they're not abstract, they're not something away from us, they're not something just for elites, they're for every single one of us.
Another Mississippian out there, and we've been very honored to have him on this show as well, is Bill Ferris, and he really did a lot to influence your career too, didn't he?
Absolutely. Bill Ferris has been incredible, continues to be incredible. I grew up in Mississippi, finished high school here, went to Vanderbilt, and I thought I would be a doctor. My father was a doctor. My mother was head of medical records at the hospital in Rankin County. And I wasn't a terribly good pre-med student. I think I was reading too many novels.
Must have been chemistry, right?
Right. My major was biology and chemistry, and became English my senior year. And Bill Ferris is running the Southern Studies program at Ole Miss. Isn't bothered by 3 of my 4 years being in the sciences, and gives me an opportunity to come to the graduate school program, a small fellowship, and has been a mentor for the 30 years since, and almost 30 years since. And of course, in the context of what I do now at the Humanities Endowment, Bill was chairman of the endowment, and we're not aware of any mentor relationship between 2 chairmen before. So that was another Mississippi story.
It's a pretty good role model when you're coming into the office, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And he's remembered fondly by the staff. And some of the things that started under his tenure, are very much still going on today.
Talk a little bit about what the National Endowment of Humanities means to Mississippi, because I mean, you're here right now. Of course, we're in the future as we're talking, but I mean, you're here for the 2 museums that are opening.
Right.
So and that's just one of many things that the endowment does for
Absolutely. If we take, say, the last 10 years, the National Endowment for the Humanities has awarded more than 75 grants to the state, equaling more than $10 million. And it's not just $10 million put into the economy here, but for every federal dollar that we're awarding, it's generating $5 other dollars in economic activity. So just on the idea of scholars being here, of great archives being here, of great museums and art museums, I'm excited about that period. But from an economic point of view, as a Mississippian, I'm really glad about that economic investment in the state.
What are some of the projects that have been the money's been invested into?
Well, to take, for example, the twin new museums, we have $100,000, into that.
Which are incredible, by the way. Both of them are just amazing.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And now that they'll be up and running, they can come back to us for future grants, of course. Yeah. We had an essential grant to the Welty House and Foundation, and I'll be meeting with them here. And of course, that's just another example of just one of the best writer house museums in the entire nation.
It truly is.
And I had the privilege of seeing any number of such places across the country. And I don't know a better leadership team, one that tells the story better. Also, individual scholars. And so it is across the community colleges, the four-year institutions, the state museums, and of course professors. And we have high school students, high school teachers that have participated in our summer institutes. And that's where they go to learn about a particular topic. Let's say, for example, World War I or World War II. And they learn how to bring that knowledge back to the classroom for the students of Mississippi. So that's just a representative sampling of what we funded.
A little bit about your career, back to your career on that. Of course, you graduated from Ole Miss, getting your master's, and then you've been at Millsaps. I mean, you've worked with soldiers, teaching them how to write. Just kind of give us a brief overview of how you got to this chair today.
Sure. Well, I think academically I'm a generalist, and honestly, that wasn't as in favor when I started my career. The idea was that you would get a PhD, you would focus in a very, very narrow area, and that would be your career, and you would be an expert on that topic. And that's one model, and it still exists. But the Southern Studies program at Ole Miss at the graduate level had a different idea. Yes, we were going to know something quite well in a narrow way, but we could go work at ad agencies. We could be museum curators. We could become university press book editors, which is what I did originally. And that was something where I worked at Mercer University Press for several years till I met my wife there. And we moved back to Mississippi. She was a minister at Northminster Baptist here in Jackson. And we moved back, and I had to decide what was I going to do with my life. I had followed her, and I didn't have a job. And I started a publishing house because one could do that. And I had the confidence to do that because of Bill and other mentors. And so I published Barry Hannah.
Wow.
Out of something I ran out of my garage, honestly, in Jackson. And Millsaps College wanted to start a magazine and needed a publication director. And I did that for 6 or 7 years. And then Dana Gioia was asked by President Bush to become chairman of the NEA. And Gioia called me and he said, would you come to Washington and be my counselor and my advisor? And so I ended up staying at the Arts Endowment for 8.5 years and left, went to the University of Virginia for 5 years. And then President Trump's now asked me to come to the Humanities Endowment. And throughout that, there's a through line of believing in storytelling, believing in being rooted to where you came from and who you are, but not being afraid to reinvent yourself, if you will.
Right.
And so for me, now in retrospect, seems very logical. But at the time, it was build it as you go. And it worked out for me.
You were on the national stage, but you keep getting called back to Mississippi. You were in the Poet Laureate Committee. You got to do that.
Yes. Governor Barber asked me to do that. They wanted one board member who resided outside of the state,
Right.
and so I was that individual. And to have Natasha Trethewey,
Yes.
just a remarkable
That
poet.
was a home run pick.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
and of course, she was asked to be the nation's poet laureate that same year.
Well, that had to make you feel good about your choice.
Yes.
I know what I'm doing.
Yes, and Natasha's just a great ambassador for our state. At the NEA, when I was there, I was working with a lot of international projects, and we were working with Northern Ireland, the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, and we got to identify one American poet to go over there. And Natasha is who Chairman Joy and I identified. So I've had the pleasure of introducing her in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and she isn't just, of course, a great representative of Mississippi, but she's a great American poet.
You mentioned the word storytellers here in Mississippi, and I've gotten to live around the country, and I've never seen anything quite like this place. And I asked this question to Mac McAnally, and I love asking it to other people because it's kind of fun to see what answer I get. Is it chicken or egg? I mean, do we have great stories, or do we just have great storytellers that bring the stories to life? Which one is it?
I do think it's environment. I think when I was at Ole Miss, I think it was natural how many Fulbright scholars came from Russia.
Yeah.
I think the linkage between Tolstoy and Faulkner in terms of a particular agrarian state telling stories in a way. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Nobel laureate, as somebody whose life experience was in South America, he saw in Faulkner something. And so I do think that the environment and the place has led to the extraordinary music, led to the extraordinary writing, and just the sheer storytelling. And what I'm excited about now is that Mississippi's taking ownership of telling its story.
That's right.
And that the state is in some ways sanctioning the telling of a complicated, transparent story about the state and its history, its achievements, but also its years of shortcomings. And so we've always been good about telling our story through song and writing to the rest of the world, but we haven't always told it inward facing.
Right.
And so that's what I think is unique about this moment. And I might also say that we didn't just get to these incredible museums. There were steps toward it. And you mentioned that I served on the Poet Laureate Committee. Governor Barber really had an understanding of cultural tourism.
He did.
And that's something I really liked. And I was privileged to be at the NEA when we awarded the first grants for the blues markers. So when Craig Ray came to Washington and talked to us about it, and you will see the National Endowment for the Arts brought that to Mississippi, and I was very proud to be a part of that. And this idea of a literary trail, a civil rights trail, a blues trail, that if you're going to have a policy of economic development that is diversified, then you're going to have a cultural tourism playing to that.
Well, it's like having a great treasure and not mining it. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. And it's such a positive story. Also, it helps keep the talent here in the state. And that's not a small thing either.
Talk a little bit about this, the state of your tenure and what you're doing with the National Endowment of Humanities. One thing I heard you do give a fantastic speech. In fact, I almost suggested you just give the speech over again because it was about the right amount of time. But you really touched on some important parts. And one of the things that kind of struck me is that you're focused on getting not only the grants into the big cities and into the hubs of what we think is traditional culture. You also want to make sure that, like, out in the rural areas too, also get some money, get some help, get some seed money.
The one thing I've said repeatedly to my colleagues at the Humanities Endowment, and great colleagues, and very smart, well-educated, they're very open-minded, and but the national conferences are always just for hotel rates. They're in Chicago, and they're in San Francisco, and they're in New York, Atlanta. Love all these cities, but what I've said is, I want to do the regional conferences too. I want to be in Iowa City. I want to be, in Little Rock. I want to, be here as I'm here in Mississippi. And they get that. And we've talked about changing our travel budget and our travel time for that, because great culture is happening all across the country. And there's a reason it's called the National Endowment for the Humanities. Right. And so I'm stressing that, as other chairmen have. But I think when you come from a small town, you internalize this in a way that, and that means, by the way, it's not just rural America. For me, it's small rural states. But that might be a part of Los Angeles, where they've never seen a federal cultural leader come into their school system or what have you. So when I go to New York City, I want to hear ways we're working with Title I high schools, not just go to the remarkable museums.
Right. And that's really exciting to me to hear you say that, because I've seen all the studies that show how, businesses want workers that are flexible and can think and can do different jobs, and how important the arts is for making that happen. It teaches the both sides of the brain.
Absolutely. Yeah. We hear that over and over. One of my first visits was to Nebraska, and I was with the leadership of the Union Pacific, and that was something that their team said. We want people that can make independent decisions. Right. We can give them the skills for how to run this or run that, but what you can't implant, what's not a realistic investment for a corporation, is to teach you how to think. Right. That's something that we do in the arts and humanities as a matter of course. Right. And I hear it too. When I talk to professors from Stanford, they want the great computer scientists they have, but they want them to make ethical decisions. Right. And that's something they're going to get from the humanities.
But, and just seeing Mississippi's history and how the artists have, the writers and the songwriters and everything else have taken that, like the blues, for instance, taken pain and turning it into that also. That makes a lot of sense. We live in a time now where a lot of people say this is the most divided time that we've ever lived in. I would disagree personally. I think anybody that lived through the 60s knows a little bit. You and I don't really remember it, but the National Endowment of Humanities was chartered in 65, right?
Correct.
So, and then Nixon vowed, he pushed through to get it extended, because it was only through the late 60s. I think it was like a 3 or 4 year. Nixon had a quote that I think is incredibly important. The arts have the rare capacity to heal divisions among our own people and vault some of those barriers that divide the world.
The French writer André Gide said, I don't remember it in the French, but he said, "Don't understand me too quickly."
Right.
And so Nixon, we have all the things we know about Nixon. He also increased dramatically the funding for the Arts Endowment, the Humanities Endowment. He created the EPA, for example. Right. Of course, he went to China after a career of leading anti-communist plank of the party. And the idea is this: that we are all complicated beings. We have various perspectives, and I think what Nixon was saying in that quote was to have some understanding of the importance of the arts, the humanities, to a well-rounded life. And that is something Reagan in a White House ceremony said a very similar thing when he supported the Humanities Endowment. And also, it's important, as each president across both political parties have said, is that we're never going to have enough money at these cultural agencies to fully fund culture. Indeed, the funds should be catalytic. And I'm a very strong believer in that, because I don't want everything fully funded by my agency. I want the people of Mississippi, for example, the private businesses, the state government, to say, this is something we too wish to invest in. Right. And so again, that's what's so great about these museums, is that it's Mississippi affirming and coming to terms with part of its history. And I'm glad that our federal agency has been a small part of that, and I certainly want to see more requests. But I like the fact that it is a local expression of that our culture matters to us as Mississippians.
You work very closely with all the state level humanities too. They really are your partners, aren't they?
Absolutely. Yeah. So annually,
Mississippi's lucky to have a great one.
Absolutely. Yeah. Stuart's team is a great team, and so to put numbers to this. Approximately, the Humanities Endowment gives out about $120 million a year.
Right.
And about 40% of that, give or take each year, is divided by a population formula with the states and various U.S. territories. So in the state of Mississippi, if you see that the State Humanities Council has brought you something, well, 50 cents out of every dollar they spend is a re-granting of NEH dollars. Okay. So you love a program, you see something at a high school, what have you. It is the great state leadership, and again, 50% of that money is coming from Washington as well.
I know what it means, but explain what acting chairman means.
Yes. So I'm head of our federal agency.
Yes.
I'm empowered to make all decisions that a chairman does.
Right.
But to be head of an agency at this level, you have to be nominated by the president, and you have to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate.
Right.
And until the president nominates you, you cannot hold yourself out as chairman.
Right.
But your title is acting chairman. And so it is a required legal semantic issue. And if a certain amount of time goes on beyond that, then I can continue to run the agency, but will be known as senior deputy chairman.
Okay.
So I may, through a period of months, move through various titles, but it doesn't change my core activity.
Right.
What I do every day is look at how we're expending funds, make sure I'm being a good steward of tax dollars, and go out and celebrate the great, rich culture of this nation.
President Trump, I think about May or so, when the previous chairman stepped down, but there was a little bit of pressure saying that he was going to defund, that you were going to get full funding in his budget, and then the next year you were going to get a much less number. The House has come back, the Senate's come back. You're going to pretty much be level funding, or we won't throw numbers around. On a political front, though, the president does seem to support the arts, though, doesn't he?
So I'll separate two things.
Okay, that's fine.
To that,
you
that
can do it
question.
better than I can, trust me.
No. Absolutely, what you said. People shouldn't confuse a budget recommendation with a commitment to
it's
arts and humanities.
At that point.
So the president, for example, has publicly announced that he's coming here for the opening of the museums.
Right.
And has been involved in other cultural institutions.
Sure.
And so I do think it's important to have our nation's leadership, express that support for arts and culture, whether it's the vice president going to see Hamilton, for example, or the president coming here. It is true that the president said that the NEA and NEH's budget is not a domestic spending priority, and he put forward a budget request that would lead to closure. The House and Senate looked at that proposal. They have proposed different numbers. The House, a modest 3% cut, Senate, no cut whatsoever. And those will be reconciled over the coming months.
Sure.
And I should say that in my interactions with the administration, I'm a member of the administration, constantly interacting, and I'm never in a room where people speak in a negative way about the arts or humanities.
And you're still suggesting people still get their grants in and still...
Absolutely, yeah. So we are open for business. And we just had a great meeting in Washington. We're going to announce new grants in about, within 10 days. So I have signed paperwork before I came here for tens of millions of dollars in grants. So I'm not just saying it. It's it's going to be it's happening. It's going to be in the newspapers. So and that's an exciting part of what, of course, I get to do with my colleagues.
Right. What do you foresee your future being?
For the agency, or
for you and for the agency? I mean, the agency. I think we know there's going to be probably be around.
I hope to serve for many years with the Humanities Endowment. I really do love this job. It's a privilege. I love the Arts Endowment. The DNA of the organizations are different but complementary. And the Arts Endowment's involved in funding the creation and presenting of the arts. So you're always with artists.
Right.
And the Humanities Endowment is when you think of Ken Burns documentaries, when you think of history, archaeology, libraries, professors. This is our side of it. So I've kind of gone from the artist side to the professor side, and I find both of them engage me. And I'll say this too: Mississippi prepared me for both. in Washington or maybe in the universities around the nation, it might seem like there's a wall between the two, but it's a Mississippi, and I never felt that way.
Right.
You would look at who Eudora Welty might be friends with, and might be a dancer or might be a scholar. I would, I interviewed Shelby Foote, but I would also interview Willie Morris, and I didn't think of one as a historian, one as a journalist, or what have you. Again, they were storytellers, and I could have added a musician in there, and it would have been the same thing.
Well, I've heard you say that that you could take a story from, say, a gay poet and a straight preacher, and still both of them are equally worthy and will change your life the same way.
I made that point of when I grew up in Mississippi that I'm reading Whitman.
Yeah.
And Leaves of Grass. And when Whitman says, I contain multitudes.
Yeah.
And that idea that we're not limited, that no one gets to say who we're going to be.
Right.
I don't think growing up as a young preteen even maybe, that I knew he was gay.
Yeah.
But when I came to that knowledge, it didn't change what I felt about it. His life journey meant nothing there. At the same time, on Sunday, when I'm, at the Methodist Church there in Brandon, Mississippi, that preacher's words of just sheer kindness, that these two, that I didn't have to choose one or the other, that I could be a person in the arts and the humanities, a person of faith, for example. Not that I don't talk about my personal life much when I talk about my professional life, but that I didn't have to choose. And for me, that's Mississippi too. That we can be multifaceted. That we're more than mere labels. I bring us back to that, that Andre Gide. Don't understand me too quickly. Don't define me by anything.
Jon, I appreciate your sheer kindness of coming and spending this time with us today. This has been a wonderful interview. Thank you.
Well, thank you. My pleasure. My honor.